let's back up a little bit to page 17. Good morning, page 17. So began by saying that the main nikuda, main point that distinguishes between kedusha and klipa, what defines kedusha and what defines klipa. Kedusha is defined by unity, and klipa is defined by the opposite, by division. And that's connected to the fact that klipa, the source and the root of klipa, is from the world of tohu. So what is the difference? What is it that made the difference between the world of tikkun and the world of tohu? The world of tikkun, which means an established world, that's Atzilus. Before that, there was a world of tohu, which is chaos. Everything fell apart. Of course, metaphorically speaking. What is the difference? The difference is that in the world of tohu, everything fell apart because of the division, because the spheres weren't able to connect to each other. And in the world of tikkun, the reason why it was contained in a structured way, in a positive way, was because the spheres were able to interact with each other, include each other, and coexist together. So that means that the thing that made the difference between klipa and kedusha in the source is unity, or the opposite, or division. And why weren't they able to become connected and united? So here's where we left off yesterday. Let's start with page 17, where it says on the bottom, two paragraphs from the bottom, the contrast. What was just described as the difference between kedusha and klipa, that what divides them is unity or division, that's the way it is also in the root, in the source. In fact, it's not also, it's because that's the way it's in the source, that's the way it is in everything that evolves from the source. What's the source? The sphere is the sphere is in the world of Tohu. That these spheres were in a way that is described as separate branches. Like I mentioned yesterday, separate branches mean just like in a tree, they all come from one source. Is the stump, the tree itself, and nevertheless there are branches, but the branches don't connect to each other. Each one branches out separately. That's how in the world of Tohu, the spheres, one is separate from the other. Let's turn to page 80. Shamid is the Tohu, the Hayu Yechaylu Mizbar Zeh. The midas of Tohu, those attributes were not able to tolerate one another. Chesed, the attribute of chesed couldn't tolerate the attribute of gevura. And gevura couldn't tolerate chesed. In other words, you had two forces. One is chesed, one is gevura. And they're not only different than each other, they're opposite of each other, but they're definitely different. And therefore, they couldn't coexist together because one is pulling in one direction and the other one is pulling in the other direction. So one could not connect to the other and couldn't interact with the other, couldn't exist together with the other. And that's why it says, and they reigned and they died. I mentioned yesterday, if you look at Chumash, Amir Tashem, when we make the copies, I'll show it to you inside, that it doesn't say much about them. It just says they ruled, and the next line is, and they died. And the next king ruled and he died. The Zohar says this is alluding to the seven, he calls them the seven kings of Tohu. The reason why they're called kings, because this is the source of everything down here that comes from the world of Tohu. Page 90. Being that in the source, which is the source of Klipa, is the world of Tohu. And the world of Tohu, what defines Tohu is separateness and divisiveness. So that is why Klipa down here is also characterized by separateness and divisiveness. So this is the Klipa of Midyan, Shamoden, Veriv, B'chinas Pirid. So Midyan is strife, contention, divisiveness, that's the clip of midyan. In other words, this nation, the klipa that's embodied in the nation of Midian, is not from a detail of the world of Tohu, but it's from the general, all-encompassing trait of Tohu, which is much more than all the details. And now he'll explain. Page 20. Yes.
Who were the 7 kings that reigned and died and reigned and died?
Who they were?
Like, who were the kings of?
Edom, the nation of Edom. Edom is a descendant of Esau.
What did it say in the Republic?
Vayishlach. At the end of Parshas Vayishlach, which is a Chumash Bereshis, at the end of that parsha. Sha'ya midas b'pchinas pirud, that the midas was separateness. So now he's explaining what is the difference between Midian and the other 7 nations. If you remember, the last question in the previous paragraph was that why do we say that Midian is in direct opposition of Shemavaya? I would think the 7 nations are much more severe, and they should be indirect, because the 7 nations, these are the source of all Klippa, and Midian is not part of the 7, so obviously it's less, it's not as intense, it's inferior Klippa-wise from all the other nations. So he says, no, the reason why it's not one of the 7 nations is just the opposite, because it's higher, if you can use the term. It's more severe than the other 7 nations. And that's why Midian is not part of the 7 nations. The Zayin numbers, when you talk about the 7 nations, Aknani, Yachiti, all these nations, they correspond to the 7 emotional attributes, which are the details of Tohu. Kol echad, the midah pratis of Tohu. So this is very much relevant to the times we're in right now, which is Sfiras Omer. What are we doing in Sfiras Omer? Where, as we know, that according to Chassidus, not according to Chassidus, according to Gemara, the Yidden were in the 49 gates of impurity, and in order to be ready for Matan Torah, they had to refine themselves. But Chassidus explains more specifically that it's all about refining our midas, specifically, mainly the midas of the Nefesh Bahamis. In fact, the carbon that they brought, the carbon Omer, a lot of people are confused about the word Omer, but the word Omer is actually means a measurement. It was a carbon that they brought on the 2nd day of Pesach, not an animal, but a carbon that was brought from grain. And the measurement was an Omer. Which grain was it? It was barley. And the Gemara says that whenever we bring a carbon that's from grain, it's usually wheat, not barley. And only 2 exceptions. One is Soita, and one is this carbon of carbon Omer. That sort of starts off the counting. So when it comes to Soita, the Gemara gives a reason. And the Gemara says this woman acted in not in a decent way, in an animalistic way. So therefore, her carbon is also, what's the difference between barley and wheat? Wheat is considered food for humans, and barley is mainly food for animals. So she acted like an animal, so she's getting that kind. But what's the connection to Sfiras Omer? So Chassidus explains, because Sfiras Omer is all about elevating and refining the animal soul. And therefore, because it's about refining the animal soul, that's why it's also a food that's for an animal, because that's what it's all about, refining the animal soul. In fact, that answers another question, which I'm sure you're all thinking about it and probably can't even sleep nights because of it. So let me calm you down. The question is, why do we count only 7 weeks? We should be counting 10 weeks. There are 10 spheres. Don't we have to refine Chokhmah and Bina and Das also? Why are they never left out? What's going to happen to our Chokhmah, Bina, Das? Why only 7? So the answer is because it says in Tanya that one of the things that define the difference between the animal soul and the human soul is that animal is primarily emotion. Even though animals have intellect also, but the intellect is just sort of serving the emotion. Like animals, as far as we know, you never know where they're going to come up out there, but as far as we know, animals don't sit down in a library doing research or sit down on a rocking chair and thinking about who created the world and when did it all happen, what's my purpose in creation. Animals are emotional. They're into this they like, this they don't like, this they hate, this they're angry. And the seichel is there to serve their emotion. In other words, where do we see seichel? How to get the food, how to run away from a hunter, how to get another animal. The seichel will work how to have this and this kind of fun or whatever enjoyment and pleasure that an animal has. So the animals, the seichel of an animal is an extension of his midas, of his emotion, but primarily an animal's emotion. And that's why it says in Tanya, chapter 9, that the animal soul is primarily located in the heart, and the godly soul is primarily located in the brain. So being that this is what distinguishes between the animal soul and the godly soul, being that our avodah now is to elevate the animal soul, that's why it's 7, because it's mainly the midas. So what is it? Is it about elevating the animal soul, or is it about refining my godly soul, making the godly soul higher, more ready to receive the Torah? So the answer is really both. I need the attribute of chesed of the godly soul to counteract the chesed of the animal soul. Is the attribute of gevura in the godly soul to counteract the attribute of gevura in the animal soul. So each one of the 7 we have in both areas. Chesed of the godly soul would be love for Hashem. Chesed of the animal soul is also love, but it's a love to the things that are inappropriate or to people that are inappropriate. The same thing with gevura. Gevura is fear of Hashem, awe of Hashem. Awe of Hashem is the godly soul's gevura. But gevura in a negative way, which means feeling fear, anxiety, or awe of something that I shouldn't be feeling that way towards that's gevura of klipa. Tiferes is compassion. Compassion in Kedusha is when they have compassion for someone where it should be, I should feel compassionate to that person. And that's a very, very big part of Yiddishkeit. Rahman is compassion. It's one of the signs of a descendant of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. On the other hand, if one has compassion for a criminal, for a thief, for a murderer, that's compassion of the Nefesh Bahamas. Famous quote from the Rambam. The Rambam says, whoever is compassionate towards someone who is an achzer. Achzer means a mean person, a cruel person. Then you're being cruel to the compassionate. In other words, those who are very compassionate for a murder and they let him out of jail early, and then God forbid he goes out and kills someone. So yes, you were compassionate for this person, but you were cruel to the people that are victims of this person. I must have told you the story that I saw a letter where a student who was studying engineering in college was failed. The professor failed him. He was very upset. And he wrote a very heart-wrenching letter to the professor. He described what a difficult life he had. He describes how difficult it was for him to get the money to be able to go to college. And he describes how difficult it was for him to study. But he made all that effort and he worked so hard and he spent so many hundreds of thousands of dollars and is dreaming about this career, and now you failed me and look what all this is going to waste. And he's pleading for his compassion to maybe rethink it and pass. I should pass. So the professor writes back, I really feel terrible for you. I really have compassion for you. Who's going to have compassion for the people that are going to walk on your bridges that you're going to build? The reason why he failed him was obviously he didn't know his material well. Then he's going to go build a bridge. And God forbid, people or cars or trucks are going to go on that bridge. Who's going to have compassion for them? So therefore, compassion to the wrong person is not a good mitzvah. That's the compassion of the animal soul. Then we have netzach. Netzach is determination, determined to bring to fruition whatever emotion I have. So when it's determination in a good way, I'm determined to be victorious. Victorious means determined to overcome all obstacles to get to my goal. That's a positive thing. But if a person has netzach in gevura, And the other side, like a power struggle, it's all about who's going to overcome who, and I don't care what you say, and I don't care what the consequences are. Let the chips fall wherever they fall. I have to have it my way. That's the Nefesh Bahamas. And the Hoid, Chassidus explained, means to be submissive, to be able to submit yourself, submissive to Hashem. That's a positive thing. That's Nefesh Elokis. Submissiveness to demands of the Nefesh Bahamas, or things that are unfortunately undesirable, or undesirable people, or undesirable things, that's a terrible midah. That's a attribute which comes from Nefesh Bahamas. And the same thing with Yisoid. Yisoid in Chassidus means to be attached. When you're learning davening, to be attached to what I'm doing, be totally immersed in what I'm doing. If I'm dedicated to helping another person, to be totally into it in a very strong way. A teacher is teaching students to be totally into it, and that's lashon hiskashrus, you say. So if you're that way in kedusha, that's an amazing thing. As we see, when it comes to davening, one of the problems are that in the middle of davening, we take a trip to Honolulu and to other places because I'm not totally into it. So other thoughts come to my head. Unfortunately, when it comes to klipa, we see people are very attached to what they're doing. You can't even detach them. They can't let go. Can't let go of that device that they're holding in their hands. They can't let go of something. They're so much attached to it that even if it's important, they can't let go. So that attachment, if it's in Kedusha, it's Yisoid of the Nefesh Elokis. If it's in Klipa, it's Yisoid of Nefesh Bahamas. And then there is Malchus. Malchus means to bring it to actual fruition, whatever it is. And if it's in Kedusha, it's positive. If it's in Klipa, it's negative. All these are details of Olam HaTorah. Then there's one point, which is the common denominator. It's the thread that goes through everything. It's the source of everything. And that is everything in Klipa is all about separation, creating a separation, division, and breaking and destroying, even though you might not see it on the surface, but if you analyze what it's all about, from Torah perspective, from Hashem's perspective, it's all about division. So therefore, that's the difference. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, which is Knani, Achiti, Ameri, Prizi, Yevusi, all these are the details. Minyan is about separation and division, and that is klipa that embodies the essence of what klipa is all about. So it's actually worse. Yeah.
Not to compare, but the worlds are also separated.
What's separated?
The worlds.
Right. So we said yesterday, when there's a separation in kedusha, it might be technically a separation. But in content, it's all about bringing things together. The Rebbe once gave this mashal when the whole issue of Mihu Yehudi was the world was on fire with that controversy. Unfortunately, it's not that the situation is better now, but then it was a time they were voting on it and fighting about it. And of course, the argument was whoever says that there are certain conditions and not everybody can become a Jew, they're creating separation, they're creating division. And we, meaning those people who are more assimilated and progressive and open-minded, they say anyone can become a Jew, even if the person, just says, I'll give charity for the Jewish people, I love the Jewish nation, I love Israel, okay, he can become a Jew. So they're much more inclusive, much more achdus, much more unity. So the Rebbe gave a mashal, which is a very powerful mashal. And the Rebbe gave the mashal of fire and water. That fire and water, they're both very important elements, and they both help us accomplish things in this world. But so much more is accomplished when fire and water work together. How could fire and water work together? So you can make this scientific experiment in your kitchen. You take the element of water, put it in an object called a pot. Then you put the pot on top of the element of fire, and you turn on the fire, and the water is boiling. Now that the water is boiling, you can do things with it that you couldn't do otherwise. Somebody would say, wow, the fire and water together can accomplish so much. So why put the water in the pot, which separates the water from the fire? Let's put the water on top of the fire, the mamish touching each other, and now it'll be amazing because they're so much more connected. So we know that if they'll do that, you either destroy the fire or you destroy the water. So technically, yes, there's a wall, but the content of this wall is all about bringing fire and water together, not about bringing them apart. Every single mechitza that there is in Torah, whether it's mechitza between Jews and non-Jews, mechitza between men and women, mechitza between Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim, mechitza between Yerushalayim and other cities, Eretz Yisrael and other countries, all these partitions, they're all about bringing two things together, not taking them apart. So therefore, when there's a lechitza, this is Atzilus, Bria, Tzira, the purpose is just the opposite. In order for Atzilus, that its light should be able to extend further, you have to have a tzimtzum, but the purpose of the tzimtzum is not to separate, on the contrary, that it should be able to reach another point. Remember the Mamar we learned about, I'll get to in a second, about the mashal. When a person like Shlomo Melech has an understanding of something that's so deep that he needs a mashal, and not only a mashal, 3,000 mashalim. So when he says 3,000 mashalim and his depth is totally concealed, it's not to bring this apart. It's just the opposite. Because I'm saying the mashal, now I can communicate my deep concept to this simple person. So those things that are partitions between two points, according to Torah, it's always to bring the two together, not to bring them apart. Yeah.
So how is the klipa of Midian, which is the klipa that embodies all klipa, different from Amalek? Because I thought we also said that Yeshus was the source of all.
I'm still working on that question. No, it's a good question, because we just had that class at Amalek, that the essence of Amalek is about Yeshus. Obviously, we didn't even get there yet, but the next few lines we'll see. And where does all this separation come from? From Yeshus. It goes back down to Yeshus. And yet there must be a big difference between Amalek and Midian. So yeah, I'm still working on it. So far no one brought it up in class. But now that you brought it up, I'll have to work harder to get an answer. Okay. Okay, so let's continue. So every one of the seven is a midah pratis. It's a detail of it. Omnom klipas midian ein midas pratis. So in other words, this is like you would have a person who's an argumentative person, a person who loves controversy, loves getting into arguments, loves making a commotion, and then he gets into fight with 10 different people. With one person, it's a fight about finances. Another person, it's a fight about a parking spot. Another person, it's a fight about a job. Another person, it's a fight about how to work the chinuch of the children. So you look at it, oh, these are 10 different fights. But the truth is, it's one thing. It's all about fighting. There was a certain individual, I'm not mentioning any names, of course, a very famous individual, that he was fighting with almost every kind of Jewish community that existed. He had a reason to fight with them. But all different reasons. But this one for this reason, that one for that reason. But he was known that he's against everything. So they said that when he's younger, his father-in-law, which was also a very great man, he said about his son-in-law that if he'd be in a forest with only trees, he'd get into a fight with every single tree. How do you get into a fight with a tree? If you're out to get into a fight, he'll find a way. So basically, it's 10 different fights, but then there's one nakuda, which is really the real source of all the 10 fights, and that is, it's all about just the desire to fight, and everything else is just a sort of an expression of that one thing. So Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus of Klippa is all an expression of one thing: separation. 7 different ways of expressing separation. So Midian is not from the detail, but in that's where Midian comes from. Midian comes from the essence, from that thread that goes through all of them. This is the klal. This is the general characteristic that encompasses all the 7 of the world of Torah, because they were on mispardim, separate branches. And this was the primary reason why the vessels of Elam HaToyu were broken. Hazayin Midas Rois, page 23. So this is the clip of midjan down here. Sheina b'chlal zayin amomit. If you sheina b'midas pratis, so again, it's not an individual midah, but it's a klolos hatayu shapirut, so it's above all the seven, and in some ways a source to them. Sherish umakar v'sivus hashrir. The summary, page 24, is that klipas midjan is all about modern v'sinas chinam. It's about strife and baseless hate. And the seven midas, they're the seven details that, in a sense, they are their outcome and their consequences of that general negative character trait. Now he's going to explain what sinas chinam is all about. What's behind it? What's the chemistry of sinas chinam? Page 25. This is the reason why the clip of midjan is related to sinas chinam. What is sinas chinam? These words, baseless hatred, it almost don't make any sense. Why would one person hate another person without any reason? So he says like this: Sina eina mitzad eza prat. It's a hate that doesn't come because of a specific detail. Shegaram lo eza ra. In other words, this person caused me some harm in one way or another. Or this person opposes me in one way or another. And because they caused me harm or because they oppose me, that's why I hate them. If a person would have the hate towards someone else for that reason, even though it's a bad midah, but it's not midjan. So, for example, if a person, for example, loves something which is klipa, and someone is trying to stop them from having what they love, and they hate them. So even though it's about hate, but it's connected to a chesed of klipa. They have a passion for something. This person is trying to stop me from pursuing and achieving what I want, my passion. So because my chesed is so passionate, so the chesed is causing me to hate him. But what would be hate alone without the seven midas? That would be connected to the midah of gevura, which is hate and anger. To be angry and hate towards someone who opposes me. In other words, there's a reason. Because he's opposing me, he's against me. Therefore, so he's arguing with him and he's having a fight with him. Page 26. What is klipas midjan about? It's not because of a detail, but he just generally cannot tolerate the other person. Meaning, he doesn't know the other person. He had no dealings with him. And he finds it impossible to connect to that person. And this is called sinas chinam. He hates him, chinam, baseless, aloy davar, for no reason. The poem is at Pratim 27. Sometimes there are details where the person can explain why he hates them. Why he hates them. That could be that the reason came later. In other words, these reasons and these details, they're not really the source of the hate. The hate comes because of baseless hate. But after that, he finds a pretext to justify and to defend himself why he hates that person. By the way, not necessarily is a person even conscious that they're doing that. They might feel hate towards someone, and when they give the reason, in their mind, they might think this is really the reason, but the reality is that it's not connected to the reason. And sometimes you can actually see it clearly why. Because when their reason is taken away, you still hate them, but for another reason. And when the second reason is taken away, then you hate them for a third reason. I once saw a letter from the Rebbe, where the Rebbe is writing to someone about anti-Semitism. I think there's more details, but what I remember in my head was that the Rebbe writes that if you go back to what the Christians were saying about Jews, why they hate them, the reason was because they have all the money and they're taking over. Even today, you hear these things from the Arabs, especially, they're controlling the world, and the money, they have all the money, they're so rich, and therefore they hate them. Then you had another place, the reason why they hated the Jews, because they're subhuman, they're so poor, they're so nothing, and they're so, they're worthless. So you hate us because we're rich, you hate us because we're poor. And they never give another 2-3 reasons. So the answer is, the hate is the hate. It's just natural. That's what it says in Rashi and Chumash. Esav hates Yaakov. And when it say, then in each situation, there's another sort of justification and rationalization why it's okay to hate. So same thing on an individual level, that sometimes a person thinks that they hate him for a reason, but really it's not true. The real reason is he can't tolerate the other person. But why can't he tolerate the other person? What's the problem with that? And here he says, and this makes your question stronger. That we're saying that it's about separation. Separation is baseless hate. And the baseless hate is because of Yeshua. So that goes back to Amalek. So we got to understand what is the difference between Amalek and Midian. That's true. So what is Yeshus? Yeshus is important in his own eyes. I'm not a bucky in English, but I'm not too sure that I would translate it the way they do, included in the concept of the Yeshus is self-concern. Self-concern is not a bad thing to be concerned about yourself. I think the definition of Yeshus, look at the next line. I think that's the definition. And again, not self-concern. What does it say is that he feels himself in every aspect of his life. It means there's a certain awareness of self that's excessive. That's what it means. What? Self-consciousness and self-awareness that's excessive. Excessive means that whatever I do, whatever's going on, what is it that registers in my head is how does it affect my image? And what is it? Let's say someone does something positive. I mean, simple example. There's someone that needs a certain favor, and you run around and you do the favor, and you see they're so happy, and you feel so good that they're happy. So there's two people. One person, oh, Baruch Hashem, I had the schus to make this person so happy. And another person, what registers in their head is, well, I'm really a nice guy. I'm a great guy. I don't know how many people will do what I did. In other words, the thought that registers in my head is, what does it do for me rather than what I just did for the other person? And if something does something wrong, is also thinking not about the damage that I did to the other person, but what are going to be the consequences for me? A person who's excessive focusing on self. What do I look like? What do people think about me? You know, a person walks down the street and is thinking, let me keep my head straight. People, maybe should walk like this. People will think this. I have to walk like that. The excessive thought of self, that is yeshus. It means, and that excessive thought of self, when a person is very much into self and self-centered, then he can't stand the other person because then he feels that everybody is sort of getting in his way. Yes.
What if it's not because of like worry about what other people can do, but like this person's very psychotic of themselves. Like they don't care. Like they could be alone. It doesn't matter. Like you said, you know about like walking down the street. They're not worried about like what other people are gonna think about them, but they are like on themselves. Like, oh, I should do this. I should do this. I should do this. Is that like yes? Also, is there
when it's excessive, it's also yeshus. Yeah. They tell the story that this Bacher in Yeshiva once came over to his mashpia. It was actually a good Bacher, but he was very broken. And he tells the mashpia that I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and this area is terrible, and that area is terrible, and all the terrible things that he's into. And it wasn't a big exaggeration, and therefore disturbs him. He can't focus on davening, he can't focus on learning, he can't go to this. So the mashpia said, let me tell you a story. There was once a mayor of a city, he is walking through the street of his shtetl, and he sees a crowd. So he goes over to see what's happening. And he sees that there is this horse that got stuck in the mud. And for some strange reason, everyone is trying to do all the tricks in the trade, and they can't get him out of the mud. This one's pulling, and this one's whispering in his ear, and this one is trying this one is tickling him. Whatever they're doing is just not working. They can't get him out of the mud. And more people are gathered. There were a few policemen there. Now the mayor was there watching, and all thought wondering, what is this about this horse? He can't get out of the mud. So there was a 10, 15-year-old kid, and he says, if you give me $10, I'll get him out of the mud. I have a few conditions, but I'll get him out of the mud in no time. So I said, really? Yeah. What's your conditions? I need a stick, I need a rag, and I need you all to leave. It'll take me 5 minutes. You'll be back. We'll see. Okay. So we gave him a stick, we gave him a rag, and they all left, went around the corner to see what's going to happen. 5 minutes later, the horse is out. What did you do? He says, I took a rag, I tied it around his eyes. Then I took a stick, I gave him a zetz in the back, and he went out. Said he was in the mud, and he was getting so much attention. First 5 people, then 10 people came, then 20 people came. The police force was here. The mayor of the city came. So it's a machaya. He's in the mud, going deeper into the mud. He gave him tied his eyes. He forgot. He didn't see the whole picture. I gave him a zetz. See that in the mud? So he was telling this book, he says, yes, you're thinking, I'm like this, and I'm like that, and I'm no good because of this, and I'm worse than this one, and I'm worse than that one, and what's going to be, how am I going to do tshuva? And you're all indulging into yourself. I'm this, and I'm that, and I'm not this, and I'm not that. Give your Sahara a zest and tell him, go move on, and stop thinking so much about yourself. So even if I'm in a room all by myself, it's not about what other people are thinking. It's me, myself, making an issue out of me, myself, and I, all 3 of them. And that's called excessive. Yes, we have to think about ourselves. That's what it's all about. But when I'm learning, I should think about what I'm learning. When I'm davening, I should think about the words of the davening. And when I'm doing work, I should be thinking about work. The idea that whatever I do, what's registering, if a person's davening, imagine I'm davening and I'm thinking of the meaning of the words, and the next thought in my head is, wow, I'm really very good. I'm thinking of every word. I'm not being distracted by other things. So instead of focusing on the words of davening, I'm focused on how good of a davener I am. The person's learning and he understands something, instead of just going into the question, the answer, explaining what's registering in his head is, I'm really a scholar. I know this stuff. I think I know this better than other people. It's, again, also registers back down to me. That's the yeshus. So when a person's very into that, then he becomes extremely sensitive to anyone that's going to touch their territory, anyone that's going to get in their way. And especially when they hear of someone who's very successful, someone who is has certain qualities, certain talents, is getting a lot of praise and attention by other people, he feels that it's infringing on his territory because it's taking away the spotlight from me.
A person can also be inspired by it, like somebody else that's like doing well and like learn from it and grow from it.
If it's not yeshus, that's what's going to happen. But if a person's obsessed with yeshus, then the reaction is going to be, how does it affect me? It's taking away from me.
Isn't that a sign of like idol worship? Like you can say idol worship.
Yeah, well, serious yeshus is a form of idol worship. Not chas v'shalom, idol worship in the true sense, but it's me. I'm focused on myself. Okay. We'll stop here to be continued. Yeah.
Fun fact, everyone, the 9 a.m. OHEL bus now leaves at 8 a.m. and they didn't tell anyone. So I just, most Chabad thing ever.
I know, you're leaving earlier.